You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.
This is Grand Design Podcast with DJ and Jerry Grand, as we link the chains of reason of sports, politics, and culture.
Welcome to the Grand Design Podcast, episode 20. I'm DJ Grand, and I'm with my brother, Jerry.
Greetings.
Today we're basically revisiting an issue we did in episode 7, and we're going to be talking about equality in sports. First, let's talk about dodgeball and how it's supposedly dehumanizing.
Yeah, that's a little bit on the inequality, and I don't know how in a sport you can have equality, be it dodgeball or any sport, because if everyone's equal, no one's going to win. The score's going to be tied, and then there's no entertainment, and what's the point of playing? But the dehumanizing part, I think they're coming from, and I'm going into the Dodgeball movie, which is hilarious, where they pick on Winston. And he actually says, remember kids, pick the most smallest, I can't quote the actor, but the worst, most whatever, athletic kid, and pick on them. Make sure the other team picks them. And then they show Winston with a pair of glasses getting just pulverized with the ball. And the kid who threw the ball gets, a congratulations. So saying that's dehumanizing to Winston.
Well, a short sidetrack right away. I used to do that in baseball. When I used to identify the weakest link out in the outfield, I'd try and hit it to the right fielder.
We were taught in CYO when you're up to the bat to aim the bat back at the pitcher like it was coming right back at him.
So it kind of works in other sports too.
Yes.
Well, anyways, as far as to put this in context, this is from The Blaze from June 12, 2019. When you're setting up an environment for students to learn and you introduce the idea that it's okay to slam the ball at whomever you like, even if it's with a softball, the intention is there, according to Joy Butler. It was a professor of pediatrics and curriculum development at the University of British Columbia. She goes on, when students think it's okay because they're being told it's okay to do that, what do they learn? People say dodgeball is being used as an outlet for aggression or catharsis. I suspect that this is where they're learning it. Physical education class should be an arena where teachers are helping students control their aggression and move on instead of expressing themselves in anger, end quote.
The problem I have with that is I've always been taught, and I tell others, that there's a lot of relations to sports and life. And in dodgeball, if you get knocked out, if you get slammed, or you get hit in the face, it's just a reason of, to get back up again and don't quit. Just like in life, you're going to get smacked in the face. Only in life, it's a lot harder than dodgeball. I mean, if you think about it, it's a game. You get back up, winners and losers. You're still alive. But there are some tragedies that'll come in life that you got to learn to cope with and get over. And I really, truly believe that playing sports teaches you that whole, it's always said that this is life. This is not football. This is life. So she's completely incorrect. I mean, that's just, well, as you would say, psychobabble.
Well, yeah, but he goes on, and in the same article, he finishes out by annihilating one's opponent, and the quote, athletic and authoritative students ran the show when it comes to rules and tended to create their own teams, and which allowed them to gang up on other students. The message is that it's okay to hurt or dehumanize the other. The competition is about annihilating one's opponent, and the true definition of competition is between two evenly matched teams. While kids stack their teams and they really enjoy beating up on the other team. What's the enjoyment of that? End quote.
Look, I always enjoyed it at first because I was little, small, growing up, not getting picked. And then it was basically showing them what a mistake it was and that I was actually good. And then the next time I got picked. So you got to go out there. If that bothers you and you want to get picked, you got to improve. You got to go out and practice. You're going to take some lumps. So again, and you can't have, an even team is not a good game. Because again, if everyone's equal, there's not going to be a winner. I mean, I get good games. There are classic games, but that doesn't mean both teams are even. Most of the time, the actual winner takes nothing. The better team loses.
Sometimes that happens. I think they're using the wrong term by equal. I think what they really mean is parity, which is...
No, I agree. And the NFL strives for that, so everyone's team has a chance to win. But at the end of the day, what they've been trying for parity, when the Patriots winning so many, has there been parity?
Well, you can't. It's in the ideal world, it would get as close to equal as possible, but it can't always happen.
If it was though, nobody would win.
Well, from the USA Today, an article by Larry Alex Taunton, he quotes the Wall Street Journal's Jeff Yang once said that dodgeball, quote, is a systemized opportunity for bullies, end quote, to target the weak. He further complained that while headshots were banned, crotch shots weren't.
Look, that happens pretty much I want to say every play, but when a safety gets hurt, a cornerback, defensive cornerback in the NFL, next play, the quarterback's going after that person. Going right after him to destroy him, to humiliate. I don't know how many times the announcers are bringing that up. How is it any different? And this is a professional athlete being embarrassed, not Winston.
That reminds me of The Longest Yard when they let him through.
Yeah,
and Burt Reynolds threw it right at him and hit him in the crotch.
He didn't do that again, did he? He wasn't the dirty player that he was before that.
It also says, according to Fox News, quote, researchers argue that there is a hidden curriculum of dodgeball that reinforces the oppression of those perceived as weaker individuals through the exercise of violence and dominance.
Look, dodgeball is no different than any other sport to where there's going to be a dominance and a weaker team. And yes, the whole point is, I don't know how many times I've heard we didn't step on their jugular. We left them in the game and they came back and won the game because we didn't want to dehumanize or embarrass them. They didn't take them out. They didn't go out and destroy them.
I don't agree with them, but I think their argument is that the weak the non-athletic weak don't have the same chance against the athletic type. Now, I was like you. I was always the smallest in the class, but that didn't stop me because I was also athletic and I would play the game to win and I would use the ball as a defensive mechanism. I would block with the ball. So I don't see how if you played the game correctly, even the weakest, the smallest could have a chance to win.
And they're getting into psychology now to where, look, if that kid wants to win and he's competitive, he'll go against the better talent because in the end, going against the better talent will make him a better player. He may get smacked a few times, but he'll block the ball. And eventually, after a year or two, he'll be the one that's being picked. And then now he's the one that's dehumanizing the other team. So it's all about practice and getting better. And some people are not athletic and it takes them time to learn. But anybody wants to learn to get better, they can. And I think these guys are just arguing for the lazy way out, that they don't want to train, they don't want to practice.
This is true. I'm trying to think. I read somewhere that dodgeball was not even listed as one of the most violent sports. Soccer was ahead of that. I mean, it wasn't even in the top 10 as one of the most violent sports.
Look, I've seen some very gruesome soccer injuries. So, yeah, I could get that. And this is probably one bit. I don't think dodgeball is even in the class of a contact sport. If you catch the ball, you get out of the way, you're going to have a problem.
I agree. And this is sort of like making everyone wear a helmet when they ride a bike. It's not always necessary.
Again, no, I completely agree. And I think this is just, again, psychobabble about dodgeball and it being dehumanizing. It's a game. It's like kickball. We play kickball a lot and you could kick the ball off of someone's face. How is that any different? You're simply using your foot, you're not throwing it.
No, I agree. The point of the game is to win, and that is what it should teach them. Teach them the skills necessary to win.
Phys ed class, from what I remember, was more for exercise. It wasn't about winning or losing. Yeah, it's natural. I don't care how you bring up kids. Kids are going to go out there and they want to compete. They want to win. They want to be the better one in any sport. They want to impress the teacher, impress the girl. They're going to go out there and compete. And yeah, there are going to be weaker ones, and they're going to just have to learn. And in life, I mean, how many times have you heard about the geek who was in school and got picked on is now Bill Gates and a billionaire 10 times over? So where's the equality there?
You can't have a total equality.
No, I know, but this guy wants equality in dodgeball, but where's the equality in business?
Well, when we were growing up, at least we were in different classes, but in my class at Our Lady of Grace, when it was clearly a weaker team, the actual male gym teacher played on that weaker team and he would throw strikes. I mean, we're talking hard strikes. So he kind of evened it up that way. So there are ways I've even seen on YouTube that there were students versus teacher dodgeball. And I've seen those teachers actually rip that ball towards them. So
sleeping in my class, I get it. It's a way to take out anger.
Yeah. So our second point of conversation about equality in sports goes to, once again, transgender competitors. This is pretty much what we talked about in episode 7. Specifically, there was a transgender hurler who won the national championship, and her name was C.C. Teffler of Franklin Pierce University, a college hurdler born male but now competing as a female, who last month won NCAA's Women's National Championship, taking the 400-meter hurdles by more than a second. Teffler, formerly known as Craig, as recently as January 2018, ran with the Division II school men's track and field team. Teffler started going by the name Cece when competing with the men before transitioning to the women's competition. And Teffler became the New Hampshire school's first women track and field champion. ESPN interviewed Teffler on Outside the Lines, and she quoted, "If anything, me competing against cisgender females is a disadvantage. According to her quote, my body is going through so many medical implications. It's going through biochemistry changes. So being on hormone replacement therapy results in muscle depletion. Your muscles are deteriorating. You lose a lot of strength because testosterone is where you get your strength, your agility. So I have to work twice as hard to keep that strength. And if I slack a day, then there's 3 days set behind. So I have to keep up all my workouts. I can't drink. I can't eat unhealthy, or else it's going to impact me harder."
What you just read is the same regimen for any athlete who trains.
I absolutely agree. And that's exactly what I was going to say, that it has nothing to do with her transitioning, that she would have to work just as hard. I guarantee you, Michael Phelps, who never transitioned, worked just as hard. It would have to work just as hard if he fell behind.
With his diet, with his training, with everything that male said applied to Michael Phelps. Every athlete, especially the world-class athletes in all the major sports, those guys train in the off-season. There may be 2 weeks off where they'll get time with their family. They're back to lifting weights, running, whatever it may be for aerobics to get their basketball players run endurance, hockey for the same thing, off-ice training. That's just ridiculous.
This is also from The Blaze from June 4th, 2019. According to the website Total Boy Sports, which researched some of Teffler's statistics as a male competitor, Teffler was an above-average male hurdler. But as women's hurdler are lower, Teffler soon dominated the competition and became the top women's competitor in the women's 55-meter hurdles and the 55-meter sprint. NCAA has a policy for transgender athletes for years. It is legal under NCAA bylaws for a biological male to compete in the women's division if that male has suppressed his testosterone levels for 1 year. A guidance document issued and published by the NCAA took the stance that it is not accurate to assume that a male who has transitioned to become a transgender female has an unfair advantage over a biological woman, saying it is important not to overgeneralize. In this instance, I think the NCAA is wrong.
Oh, absolutely. Because I was just going to say, apparently, even with his testosterone replacement, he's still running fast like he did with the testosterone. Hasn't really done that much. He's blowing these girls out like the men would.
To me, it's not even a point about running fast. It's a matter of he now has an unfair advantage. He still has the bone structure of a male. It doesn't matter what less testosterone or not.
Bone structure, psychology,
body chemistry,
everything. Correct.
So I think it creates an unfair advantage when a M to F, male to female transgender, competes with biological women.
I agree. And that kind of goes into our next one, where a transgender weightlifter was stripped of the world record because...
Well, this is from Yahoo Sports Canada. Mary Gregory sparked controversy earlier in May after claiming on Instagram that she had won 9 out of 9 events, which included setting a new Masters World Squat record, Open World Bench record, Masters World Deadlift record, and Masters World Total record. However, RAW Powerlifting Federation have now decided to take the titles off the American athlete in a decision that could have huge ramifications for transgender athletes. The president of the federation, Paul Bossi, told Mail Online that Gregory could not have been considered a female when she broke the records. It was revealed that the female lifter was actually a male in the process of becoming a transgender female, Bossi said. Our rules and the basis of separating genders for competition are based on physiological classification rather than identification. On the basis of all information presented to the board of directors for this particular case, the conclusion made is that the correct physiological classification is male.
So therefore, the NCAA is completely wrong.
Well, Absolutely, but this isn't the NCAA. This is Powerlifting
that's
Federation.
my point.
Well, yeah, I said that in the beginning. They were wrong.
If Raw or the NCAA used the Raw definition there, the hurdler would have been stripped of his, wouldn't be allowed to compete. So my question would be, why is one okay, the NCAA, and yet the other one got stripped? That's a complete contradiction.
Well, here's what I agree with. Quote from the USA Powerlifting: men naturally have a larger bone structure, higher bone density, stronger connective tissue, and higher muscle density than women. These traits, even when reduced levels of testosterone, do not go away. While M to F, male to female, may be weaker and less muscled than they once were, the biological benefits given them at birth still remain over than of a female.
Even though they're weaker, they're still stronger than the females. It's not that hard. So for them, I mean, I agree with Raw. This shouldn't be allowed. They strip all the titles, and the NCAA they need to read this.
I totally agree. There was also an angry backlash from Olympians. Great Britain Olympic swimmer Sharon Davis tweeted, "Any records set by trans women, those born male with male biology and advantages, should be removed when all this confusion and unfairness is sorted out." She called it an unfair playing field.
I wonder how they would feel if Michael Phelps went transgender and competed against the ladies.
Well, this particular Mary Gregory is complaining that the reason she got caught was because they made her take a urine test in front of someone, and apparently that someone saw her penis. If that makes sense. And so she's claiming that that's the reason why. Had that not happened, she never would have lost her titles.
So she got caught because she peed standing up.
No, she was sitting down when it happened, but
So she was. That's funny.
Well, that's what she's claiming.
Going into our third topic, and this one is probably the most interesting, is the U.S. women's soccer. Now, in the beginning here, with the whole protest for the ladies, how they want equal pay to the men's soccer team. They want to be compensated in every single way as the men. And no, absolutely not. I would tell any of them, go try out for a men's MLS team, which is the Major League Soccer team, not the Olympic team. If they make it, they can compete and they get a contract, great. But they probably won't because they'll be destroyed and if not hurt. So for what they're asking for, Megan Rapinoe is one of them, is complete equality, which she'll never get. Because to be equal, she would have to play with the men. And she's not realizing that she can't. She will get destroyed. If she played against, look, the men's Olympic team hasn't been doing very well. And the women's team have. That doesn't mean the women should play with the men, that they're better than the men.
I totally agree. I think that will prove that they aren't equally as far as on the soccer field, because most of the men would make the team if they were judged objectively. Most men would make the team and very few female would.
If they played a game where the men didn't feel bad and it was all, across the board competition, you think the ladies team would even stand a chance against the men's team? And the men's team isn't really good. They'd get the men's team would destroy the ladies team. So there's no equality. They can't be. What they're asking for cannot and it will never happen.
Well, there's also another issue I want to talk about in terms of Megan Rapinoe, and that is her silent protest against President Trump and the national anthem. Like, I have no problem with a protest with the national anthem, whether you say it or don't say it. If you sit, stand, kneel,
wear a hat, whatever.
That doesn't bother me at all. In fact, for decades, I would not stand for the national anthem, but not for the reasons she's refuses to stand. According to the Blaze again, the star for the women's soccer team kept her promise to ignore the celebration of the national anthem as an FU to President Donald Trump. To me, that is a problem. You want to protest. If you don't want to stand or if you want to sit, you want to kneel, do it. But to do it as in a effort of disrespect is absolutely wrong. Now, I said this in episode 7, and I think it needs to be repeated. The point of fascism is to make the masses act as one. What are you doing when everybody in a 10,000 seat arena stands and sings the same song, trying to hit the same notes? It is the masses acting as one. It is inherently a fascist endeavor. And it's for that reason I refuse to stand with the masses. It doesn't mean I'm not patriotic. It doesn't mean I don't want America and I don't care about America. It means I refuse to do anything in a fascistic in a fascistic way. That to me is a philosophical reason not to stand for the national anthem. Saying you want to F you to any president, I don't care if it's Donald Trump or Barack Obama, that is disrespectful and is wrong.
I was going to bring that up because when Obama won, there were a lot of people who weren't happy about it, and they were told, you can't disrespect the office. Got to respect it. There were some people, some athletes that didn't want to go to the White House, and they were ridiculed for not going to Obama's White House when they won championships. Now it's completely opposite. They're cheered when they don't go to Trump's parties. And these people now can say F the president, but we couldn't say F the president when Obama was in. That wasn't allowed. It was, no, you must honor the president. Where did that go? I want to ask Mrs. Rapino, where did that go? How come it wasn't F Obama, but now it's F Trump and it's okay? 8 years ago, couldn't do that. Why? What has changed to where she can say F Trump, but I could not say F Obama or Barack Obama? That bothers me.
I believe what has changed is, falsely or not, they are assuming that Trump is anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ, whatever.
They're just following the press and
the point is she's doing it because she's gay, and that
correct,
that
and because
pisses her off.
Because the press, but the press have railed Trump for that reason, so she's just jumping on that bandwagon. Period. End of story. That's really kind of where she's coming from, and that gets into the equal pay.
I think she's continuing on. We can talk about the equal pay in a second.
She's making.
I think she also did it to align herself with Colin Kaepernick when he did it. Okay, fine. That kind of a protest, I have no problem with. Now she can continue to do it just to give a metaphorical middle finger to the president, and that is where I see it as being wrong.
That's what Colin Kaepernick was doing, and giving a metaphorical middle finger to Roger Goodell and all the ex-veterans out there. That's
I don't think it was a metaphorical middle finger. I think he was actually trying to protest what he saw, right or wrongly, he saw as inequality in America, black oppression, whatever. I don't really think that was strictly to Donald Trump. What Megan Rapinoe is doing is directly to Donald Trump. I think that's the difference. And that's why I think she's wrong in this instance.
I completely agree with you there.
So if we want to go back to the issue of equal pay, they did Elle did a article about Hope Solo, and they talked about the equal pay and what went down. The 2015 World Cup final was watched by a reported 25 million Americans and remains the country's most viewed soccer match, male or female. But the tournament also highlighted long-standing discrepancies between the women's team and the men's. It was played on artificial turf and undisputedly more difficult terrain than natural grass, whereas the men's World Cup has always been on grass. When the women won, the team's bonus was $2 million. In 2014, when the men lost in the 16th round, theirs was $9 million.
No, I completely agree, but here we go again. This is not really hard. They are not equal. They cannot compete with the men. They will get blown away. So it would justify that $9 million for not winning, and the ladies only getting $2 million.
Okay, well, the article continues. It was about Hope Solo. So in 2015, at Hope Solo's urging, the team replaced their lawyer, who long represented the players' union, with Nichols, known as a pugnacious approach. Nichols then hired Jeffrey Kessler and his colleagues at Winston & Strawn as outside counsel. Kessler handled Tom Brady's Deflategate, just so it's known. One of his opening moves was filing the EEOC suit. According to Kessler, it is almost classic example of gender discrimination. In 2016, if women won every one of the required 20 annual exhibition games, they could make $99,000. If the men lost every one, they'd still be paid $100,000. And while top female players earn a salary similar to that of top men, in 2015, Hope Solo made $366,000. Lower tier males could make 10 times as much as comparable to women. This claim referenced the Federation's own financial reports, which stated in 2015 generated $24 million in event revenue and $2 million more than the men. The women generated $24 million. The USSF stated in response to this lawsuit filed in May that the women received guaranteed salaries while the men do not. Unlike the women, the men tend to have substantial professional club contracts to fall back on. The response also declares that differences in pay are based on differences in the aggregated revenue, meaning the men's team make more money, not necessarily through events, but via sponsorships and TV rights.
100% absolutely correct. And again, we're going to go back to simply, look, ladies, play the men's team. Play them. Now, we're going back to Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs, but I kind of think he let her win, so whatever. But that if they play all they want the equality, like they say, they're equal. And the men aren't feeling sorry, which they wouldn't be equal now because the men were feeling bad that they were killing them because the men are giving up now, so they're not equal anymore. They will get destroyed. And then what all that guy just said there is completely irrelevant because they're not equal. We've been about discrimination. People discriminate 100 times a day. When they got married, they discriminated when they chose their wife, their partner. When they go get something to eat at a fast food or a restaurant, they're discriminating between why didn't they pick the other restaurant. They're just trying to see, they're using the word discrimination, as you point out, in the wrong context, and that's the problem. They're not equal. Sorry, as you said before, where's the only place where you get equality?
The local graveyard where everyone's equally dead.
Okay, Megan Rapinoe, that's the place that when you want equality, if you want it, that's where you got to go. Sorry.
Well, it's like you said, there's no way you can have a total equality because earlier you brought up the results would always be a tie if it was equal. There'd be no winner or losers, which once again we get to the participation trophies, which is the same exact. There's the equality. That's not the result of it.
That's not entertaining.
No, it's not. So but that's what they want. That's the outcome they are asking for, whether they know it or not, and maybe unwittingly, but that's what they're asking for, a tie in every single situation.
If they want to bring the men's pay down, then the men start tying all the time. The viewership would go down, and they wouldn't make the money. Their pay would drop.
Well, it's not just men. Every sport. They want total equality in every sport.
It doesn't, yeah. Women's hockey, men's hockey.
I want to get back to the Bobby Riggs and Billie Jean King, because I don't think Billie Jean King may have been the best woman at the time, but Bobby Riggs wasn't. I would like to see the best woman play the best man in any sport. I don't care if it's golf. I don't care if it's tennis, like Bobby Riggs and Billie Jean King. Any sport.
But
you
compete
really want to
equally.
you really want to see a difference? Let's look at hockey.
No,
I guarantee you there's not a single, or very few anyways, that would be able to compete with the likes of Sidney Crosby or Claude Giroux, or any of the great players.
Watch an NHL game. Then watch a women's game, and you will see how slow and literally how anti-checking the women are compared to the men. It's not equal. It can't be. I mean, when I watch some of the women, the Olympic women, it reminds me of men's beer leagues. You know, some of the things they do and the size. I mean, the women are kind of our size. You know, they're small. So it's not the same, but I was going to bring up the women's hockey. They're good players in some of those games.
I think the women are great players, but they're not even close to being equal to the men. Oh, not even close as far as athletic sports go.
And you put them on skates, the men would just, even though they're on skates too, they would just tower over them. It wouldn't be funny. It'd be horrifying if that really happened. So again, even for Mrs. Rapinoe, equality, it can't happen. What she wants just will not happen. And I think you had brought up, she's looking for an unequal advantage for all this here. She wants to gain.
I just want to clarify. In our world, I think women should have the equal opportunity to have any job they want. A very wise philosopher once said that women should be able to have any job except professional football player or longshoreman. Any other job, a woman should be able to go after and have. I totally agree with that. But I don't see the kind of equality they're looking for on any sports field. It cannot happen.
Nope, I agree. And I don't think when the U.S. women dominated Thailand, it was dehumanizing. They were just most of the press countries were outraged because they were celebrating after it was 7-0 and 10-0. Look, Thailand was horrible, but stop them.
But that's not also I heard. I also people complain that they didn't let up after 7-0. What's the point? No, but there is a point to scoring those goals. The point is that the tiebreaker is in goal differential.
In soccer,
and it matters.
It's aggregate score. And Alexei Lalas pointed that out. I don't know the announcer, but I don't know if he was the host or if he was on the Olympic Committee, but he was going after it, and he said, and I quote, they should have give up or taken their foot off the throat after 3-0. They didn't need to score 4. It was over at halftime. They didn't need to score 7 goals. And Alexei basically said, what are you going to do? Roll over? And yes.
So that means they roll over and then Thailand catches up and they lose.
I brought that
up. That's okay.
I brought that up earlier.
I think that's what their goal is.
That's the whole point. We let up. They came back. We gave that game to them. How many times did we hear that? We lost that game. They didn't win the game. We lost it. We gave that game to them. You're right. That's what they want.
One of the classic hallmark identifications of evil is hating the good for being good, not for their vices, not for their wrongdoings, but because they're good. And this is an example of that. They didn't go after them because they were bad. They went after them because they're too good.
Yeah, it's almost like the Detroit fans hating Matt Stafford because he's good, and they're not. They're jealous that they can't do what he does and gets paid all that money.
I don't know about Matt Stafford. I kind of don't think they hate him like that. A better example is how Detroit fans hate Sidney Crosby because he is so good.
You're right, but Detroit fans hate Matthew Stafford on that level of Sidney. I know that sounds ridiculous, but they do because he hasn't taken him anywhere. That's a different topic.
See, I just think more. I think it's not as hate because hate is what I applied to Sidney Crosby. It's more of a genuine. Deep dislike, a disappointment because he didn't take him to the promised land.
When I hear sports radio and they bring up the Lions, there's nothing but, and I'm talking venom and hate coming from these callers. And it's not pretty.
But you're sure that's coming from a place of disappointment or coming from a place of hate? See, I think it's coming from a place of disappointment.
I think it's jealousy because they can't do what Stafford does, and Stafford makes $26 million. That bothers. I go to work. I'm a Joe Lunchbox. I work 40 hours. He doesn't work 40 hours. He is getting paid. It's a jealousy. You know, it's almost like they want that equality. If he can make $26 million.
No, first of all, they can't do it as good as Stanford.
I completely agree.
That's no different than saying I want Bill Gates' money. They can't do what he did as good as him.
That's why I bring it up, because the women can't do what the men's soccer team can. That's why I brought that up. But some of the fans do hate certain of their stars because it's an envy. They can't do it. They think they're better. They played high school sports. You know how many times I hear a person calling, I played college ball. Like they know what they're talking about. They have to get that out there. They have to brag about it to make it justify that they can criticize Matt Stafford now, when really it's because he makes all that money. Again, it's a jealousy. But we're kind of digressing. But there's also, I don't think Ms. Rapinoe understands what she wants, and the result that if it came through, and you have a little story that you're going to read basically that's going to explain what happens when it's all equal.
This is by Kurt Vonnegut Jr., and it's Harrison Bergeron. It's going to take about 5 or so minutes, so bear with me. The year was 2081, and everyone was finally equal. They weren't only equal before God and the law, they were equal in every which way. Nobody was smarter than anyone else. Nobody was better looking than anybody else. Nobody was stronger or quicker than anybody else. All of this equality was due to the 211th, 212th, and 213th Amendments to the Constitution, and to the unceasing vigilance of agents of the United States Handicapper General. Some things about living still weren't quite right, though. April, for instance, still drove people crazy for not being springtime. And it was in that clammy month that the HG men took George and Hazel Bergeron's 14-year-old son, Harrison, away. It was tragic, all right, but George and Hazel couldn't think about it very, very hard. Hazel had a perfectly average intelligence, which meant she couldn't think about anything except in short bursts. And George, while his intelligence was way above normal, had a little mental handicap radio in his ear. He was required by law to wear it at all times. It was tuned to a government transmitter. Every 20 seconds or so, the transmitter would send out a sharp noise to keep people like George from taking unfair advantage of their brains. George and Hazel were watching television. There were tears in Hazel's cheeks, but she'd forgotten for the moment what they were about. On the television screen were ballerinas. A buzzer sounded in George's head, and his thoughts fled in panic, like bandits from a burglar alarm. There was a really pretty dance. That dance they just did, said Hazel. Huh, said George. The dance, it was nice, said Hazel. Yep, said George. He tried to think about the ballerinas. They weren't really very good, no better than anyone else have been anyways. They were burdened with sash weights and bags of birdshot, and their faces were masked, so no one, seeing a free and graceful gesture or a pretty face, would feel like something the cat drug in. George was toying with the vague notion that many dancers shouldn't be handicapped, but he didn't get very far with it before another noise in his radio scattered his thoughts. George winced. So did 2 of the 8 ballerinas. Hazel saw him wince. Having no mental handicap herself, she had to ask George what would the latest sound been. Sound like someone hitting a milk bottle with a ball-bean hammer, said George. I think it would be real interesting hearing all the different sounds, said Hazel, a little nervous. All the things they think up. Said George. Only if I was handicapper general, you know what I would do, said Hazel. Hazel has a matter-of-fact, bore a strong resemblance to the handicapper general, a woman named Deanna Moon Glampers. If I were Deanna Moon Glampers, said Hazel, I have chimes on Sunday, just chimes, kind of in honor of religion. I could think if it was just chimes, George said. Well, maybe make them real loud, said Hazel. I think I'd make a good handicapper general. Good as anybody else, said George. Who knows better than I do what normal is, said Hazel. Right, said George. He began to think glimmerly about his abnormal son, who is now in jail, about Harrison, but a 21-gun salute in his head stopped that. Boy, said Hazel, that was a doozy, wasn't it? It was such a doozy that George was white and trembling. Tears stood at the rim of his red eyes. 2 of the 8 ballerinas had collapsed to the studio floor, were holding their temples. All of a sudden, you look so tired, said Hazel. Why don't you stretch out on the sofa so you can rest your handicap bag of pillows, honey bunch? She was referring to the 47 pounds of birdshot in a canvas bag that was padlocked around George's neck. Go on and rest the bag for a while, she said. I don't care if you're not equal to me for a while. George weighed the bags in his hands. I don't mind it, he said. I don't notice it anymore. It's just part of me. You've been so tired lately, kind of worn out, said Hazel. I think we're just some of the way we could make a little hole in the bottom of the bag and just take a few of them lead balls, just a few. 2 years in prison, $2,000 fine for every ball I took out, said George. I don't call that a bargain. If you could just take a few out when you came home from work, said Hazel. I mean, you don't compete with anybody around here. You just sit around. If I tried to get away with it, said George, other people would get away with it, and pretty soon we'd be right back to the dark ages again, where everybody competing against everybody else. You wouldn't like that, would you? I'd hate it, said Hazel. There you are, said George. The minute people started cheating on laws, what do you think happens to society? If Hazel had been able to come up with an answer to this question, George couldn't have supplied one. A siren had gone off in his head. Reckon it all fall apart, said Hazel. What would, said George blankly. Society, said Hazel uncertainly. Was that what you just said? Who knows, says George. The telephone program was suddenly interrupted for a news bulletin. It wasn't clear at first as to what the bulletin was about, since the announcer, like all announcers, had a serious speech impediment. For about half a minute, and in a state of high excitement, the announcer tried to say, ladies and gentlemen. He finally gave up and handed the bulletin to a ballerina to read. That's all right, Hazel said to the announcer. He tried. That's the thing. He tried to do the best he could with what God gave him. He should get a nice raise for trying so hard. Ladies and gentlemen, said the ballerina, reading the bulletin. She must have been extraordinarily beautiful because the mask she wore was hideous. And it was easy to see that she was the strongest and most graceful of all the dancers. For her handicap bags were as big as those worn by 200-pound men. And she had to apologize at once for her voice, which was a very unfair voice for a woman to use. Her voice was warm, luminous, timeless melody. Excuse me, she said as she began, making her voice absolutely uncompetitive. Harrison Bergeron, age 14, she said with a crackle squawk. He had just escaped from jail where he'd been held on suspicion of plotting to overthrow the government. He's a genius and an athlete, is under-handicapped, and should be regarded as extremely dangerous. A police photograph of Harrison Bergeron was flashed on the screen upside down, then sideways, upside down again, then right side up. The picture showed the full length of Harrison against the background, calibrated in feet and inches. He was exactly 7 feet tall. The rest of Harrison's appearances was Halloween and hardware. Nobody had ever borne heavier handicaps. He had grown hindrance faster than the HG men could think them up. Instead of a little radio ear for a mental handicap, he wore a tremendous pair of earphones and spectacles with thick, wavy lenses. The spectacles were indeed to make him not only half blind, but to give him wanging headaches besides. Scrap metals hung all over him. Ordinarily, there was a certain symmetry, a military neatness to the handicaps issued to strong people. But Harrison looked like a walking junkyard. In the race of life, Harrison carried 300 pounds. And to offset his good looks, the HE men required that he wear at all times a red rubber ball for a nose, keep his eyebrows shaved off, and cover his even white teeth with black caps at a snaggle-tooth random. If you see this boy, said the ballerina, do not, I repeat, do not try to reason with him. There was a shriek at the door being torn apart from its hinges. Screams and barking cries of consternation came from the television set. The photograph of Harrison Bergeron on the screen jumped again and again, as though dancing in the tune of the earthquake. George Bergeron correctly identified the earthquake, as he well might have. For many was the time his own home had danced in the same crushing tune. My God, said George, that must be Harrison. The realization was blasted in his mind instantly by the sound of an automobile collision in his head. When George could open his eyes again, the photograph of Harrison was gone. A living, breathing Harrison filled the screen. Clocking, clownish and huge, Harrison stood at the center of the studio. The knob of the uprooted studio door was still in his hand. Ballerinas, technicians, musicians, and announcers cowered to their knees before him, expecting to die. I am the emperor, cried Harrison. Do you hear? I am the emperor. Everyone must do what I say at once. He stamped his foot and the studio shook. Even as I stand here, he bellowed, crippled, hobbled, sickened. I am a greater ruler than any man who ever lived. Now watch me become what I can become. Harrison tore the straps of his handicap harness like a wet tissue paper, tore straps guaranteed to support 5,000 pounds. Harrison's scrap iron handicaps crashed to the floor. Harrison thrust his thumbs under the bar of the padlock and secured his head harness. The bar snapped like celery. Harrison smashed his headphones and spectacles against the wall. He flung away his rubber ball nose, revealed the man who would have awed Thor, the god of thunder. I shall now select my empress, he said, looking down at the cowering people. Let the first woman who dares rise to her feet claim her mate and her throne. A moment passed, and then a ballerina arose, swaying like a willow. Harrison plucked a metal handicap from her ear, snapped off her physical handicaps with a marvelous delicacy. Last of all, he removed her mask. She was blindingly beautiful. Now, said Harrison, taking her hand, shall we show the people the meaning of the words dance? Music, he commanded. The musicians scrambled back to their chairs, and Harrison stripped them of their handicaps too. Play your best, he told them. I'll make you barons and dukes and earls. The music began. It was a normal, at first, cheap, silly, false. But Harrison snatched two musicians from their chairs, waved them like batons as he sang the music he wanted it played. He slammed them back into their chairs. The music began again, and was much improved. Harrison and his empress merely listened to the music for a while, listening gravely, as though synchronizing their heartbeats with it. They shifted their weights to their toes. Harrison placed his big hands on the girl's tiny waist, letting her sense the weightlessness that would soon be hers. And then, in an explosion of joy and grace, into the air they sprang. Not only were the laws of the land abandoned, but the law of gravity and the laws of motion as well. They reeled, whirled, swiveled, flounced, capered, and spun. They leaped like a deer on the moon. And the studio ceiling was 30 feet high, but each leap brought the dancers nearer to it. It became their obvious intention to kiss the ceiling. They kissed it. And then, neutrally gravity with love and pure will, they remained suspended in the air inches below the ceiling, and they kissed each other for a long, long time. It was then that Diana Moon Glampers, the handicapper general, came into the studio with a double-barrel 10-gauge shotgun, fired twice, and the emperor and empress were dead before they hit the floor. Diana Moon Glampers loaded the gun again. She aimed at the musicians and told them they had 10 seconds to get their handicaps back on. It was then that the Bergeron television tube burned out. Hazel turned to comment about the blackout to George, but George had gone into the kitchen for a can of beer. George came back in with the beer, paused while a handicap signal shook him up, and then he sat down. You've been crying, he said to Hazel. Yup, she said. What about? He said. I forget, she said. Something real sad on television. What was it? He said. It's all kind of mixed up in my mind, said Hazel. Forget sad things, said George. I always do, said Hazel. That's my girl, said George. He winced. There was a sound of a riveting gun in his head. Gee, I could tell that one was a doozy, said Hazel. You can say that again, said George. Gee, said Hazel. I could tell that one was a doozy. There is the ultimate outcome of the equality these people are asking for.
So, yes, Miss Rapino, is that what you want? Is that what you're looking for? Because that's what you're going to get with You Want Equality. We'll end it at that.
This is the Grand Designs Podcast. Let me tell you where you can get in touch with us first before we let you go. Our website is granddesignspodcast@yahoo.com. Our email is granddesignspodcast@yahoo. You can follow us on Twitter at Grand Designs Pod. Instagram is at Grand Designs Podcast. You can hear this podcast just about anywhere you get podcasts now. This is the Grand Design Podcast. Who are you listening to?